It begins in the quiet hours, when the world has gone still, but your mind hasn't. The screen glows in your hand, your thumb moves without thought, and your heart beats like it's searching for something, anything, to feel. You tell yourself it's just desire, just a moment of release, just a habit, nothing more. Everyone does it. It's normal, but if you were truly honest, brutally honest, you'd feel the hollowness rising before it even ends. Not after, during. You chase it like it will save you. You convince yourself it's passion, hunger, need. But underneath it all is grief. Grief for something you can't quite name. There's a sadness in it, isn't there? An emptiness that echoes through the fantasy even as you indulge it. Because it's not about the body, not really. It's about the ache beneath the surface, the ache that whispers, there must be more than this. Carl Jung saw it clearly, long before modern psychology gave it permission to speak. He wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this constant reaching, grasping, scrolling, consuming, it's not pleasure, it's escape. Escape from the silence that surrounds you. Escape from the loneliness that pulses louder in the dark. Escape from the aching truth that you don't know how to be with yourself. Not really. You think you want her, but what you're starving for is something deeper, to feel alive, to feel held, to feel seen, to feel real just for a moment. But instead of turning inward, you chase the next hit, the next image, the next high, the rush of dopamine that evaporates the second it arrives. And then, the silence returns, the void returns. And so does the self you've been running from, untouched, unchanged, unhealed. Lust isn't the enemy. It's the messenger. It's the soul knocking on your door, begging you to listen. Because behind the craving, behind the compulsion, is a profound disconnection. You've been living outside yourself, detached from your body, disconnected from your purpose, estranged from your emotions. You're not anchored. You're not home. So you reach for the closest substitute, the illusion of intimacy, the illusion of control, the illusion of being wanted. Jung would call this the shadow, the hidden part of you that was never fully seen, never truly loved. And now, it searches for validation in all the wrong places. It's not just sex, it's not just porn, it's every way you abandon yourself just to avoid feeling abandoned. The 2 a.m. scroll, the empty conversations that flirt with connection but never touch your soul, the mental reruns of someone who once made you feel desirable, but what you're really doing is running. Running from the loneliness that hums beneath your skin like a quiet storm. Because to pause, to truly feel it, would mean facing a truth you've buried for years. That it was never just about release. It was always about rescue. Rescue from the numbness. From the ache you were taught to silence. From the needs you were told were too much. Jung didn't judge the lust. He saw it for what it was. A signal, a symptom, a spiritual hunger. Disguised as desire, he knew the question wasn't, why do I feel lust? But rather, what pain is this lust trying to cover up? You chase bodies, but you never find intimacy. You chase fantasies, but you never feel seen. You reach the climax, but never the core. Because what you're truly longing for isn't pleasure. It's presence, not another body to conquer, but the sacred return to your own. The part of you that keeps reaching outward is the part that no one ever met inward. And Jung, in his Red Book, wasn't writing about lust, or power, or control. He was writing about the soul's cry for reunion, the deep need to gather your scattered pieces to call home the exiled parts of yourself that got buried beneath shame, silence, and survival. It takes courage to face that emptiness, to sit with it, breathe into it, and not run. So before you open that app, before you send that text, before you follow the craving down its familiar path, pause. Ask yourself, is this lust, or is this loneliness dressed in skin? Because Jung never saw lust as a sin. He saw it as a signal, a coded message from the unconscious, a soul starvation masquerading as desire. When you're disconnected from your inner world, your craving doesn't come from wholeness. It comes from fragmentation. You don't lust because you're wrong. You lust because you're divided. In the Red Book, Jung confessed, I must learn that the dregs of my thought, my dreams, are the speech of my soul. So when that lust hits, sudden, irrational, consuming, it's not about her, it's about you, about a part of you you've abandoned. In Jungian thought, there's a name for that inner feminine in men. It's called the Anima. And when she's unconscious, you forget how to feel, you forget how to surrender, how to love without needing to possess. So your soul does the only thing it knows. It projects. You place your lost tenderness, your innocence, your light onto her body, her smile, her presence. Not because she is those things, but because she reminds you of the part of yourself you no longer have access to. So when you ache for her, you're not chasing sex, you're chasing a soul fragment. That was once yours. And that's why it hurts, because no matter how many times you chase it, you never reach it. Because you're not chasing her, you're chasing yourself in someone else's skin. The more cut off you are from your anima, the more your desire becomes frantic, empty, and violent in its urgency. You scroll endlessly, fantasize about people you barely know, rewind the same images, trying to feel something, anything, but every time the screen goes dark, you feel even more distant from yourself. Jung warned, the shadow doesn't seduce you with wickedness, it seduces you with illusion. You don't see her, you see your unmet needs, your suppressed tenderness, your forgotten warmth, and because you haven't reclaimed these pieces inside, you try to possess them outside. But lust, when it's disconnected from love, will always collapse, because no one can carry the weight of your unfelt grief. No body can complete the story you haven't finished writing. So what do? You need more stimulation, more novelty, more intensity. Not because you're greedy, but because your soul is starving, and instead of feeding it depth, you feed it distractions. You think the answer lies in more content, more bodies, more escapism. But all you're doing is running faster in a maze that always leads back to your emptiness. Jung said the solution isn't to ask, who turns me on? But to ask, what part of me have I turned off? Because when you reconnect with your emotions, your dreams, your longing, lust begins to change. It becomes sacred, not destructive, creative, not a trap, but a threshold. Jung called it integration, the return of the exiled parts of the self, back into the light of awareness. Lust is not trying to shame you, it's trying to awaken you. It's the soul's alarm screaming, come back to yourself. You don't just want someone to touch your body, you want someone to witness your being. You don't just want release, you want relief from the ache of being unseen, untouched, unheld, even by yourself. Here's the truth Jung whispers through the pages. Until you face your soul, your desire will always be misdirected. You'll keep calling it love when it's really longing. You'll fall into arms that never feel like home because the home you seek is the one within, the one you abandoned long ago. So the next time desire surges through you, pause, don't suppress it, don't follow it blindly. Ask it gently, what are you trying to show me about myself? Because when you learn to feel the energy without becoming it, you don't become numb, you become clear. And in that clarity, you can choose connection, not fantasy, not performance, not escape, but presence. And from that sacred presence emerges a kind of love lust could never give you. Because lust, when severed from the soul, isn't just a distortion in how you see others. It's a slow disfigurement of how you see yourself. It begins subtly, almost invisibly. One day you notice that you're avoiding eye contact, not because you're shy, but because you're ashamed. Conversations lose their depth. Vulnerability becomes dangerous. You hide behind practiced smiles and curated responses. You laugh when you're supposed to. You nod when required. But deep down, you feel like a ghost moving through your own life. You seek comfort not in people, but in projections. You begin to retreat, not into solitude, but into seductive illusions. Because fantasy, unlike reality, never asks you to show your scars. It only asks for your attention, and you give it freely because inside you feel unseen. But every time you choose illusion over intimacy, a part of you fades. A part that used to hope, a part that used to reach. Then it deepens. You lose more than just sexual drive. You lose the will to live from the inside out. Your creativity dries up. You stop writing not because you're lazy, but because your spirit no longer feels safe enough to speak. You stop building because you no longer believe in what you're building for. You stop imagining futures worth living in. Because lust, when unconsciously indulged, doesn't just burn, it consumes. It consumes the same sacred fire that was meant to ignite your gifts, your vision, your calling. And in its place, it leaves a hollow, desperate hunger, a need for stimulation mistaken for passion, a craving for intensity confused with intimacy. Lust becomes your shortcut to aliveness. But like all shortcuts, it comes with a price. And the price is your soul's voice, growing quieter each time you choose a screen over a struggle, a fantasy over a feeling, an orgasm over openness. Jung once wrote that every time we feed a craving without awareness, we strengthen the psychic complex behind it. This is the loop: trigger, reaction, relief, guilt, repeat. And each cycle carves deeper grooves into the psyche, making the pattern feel like personality. You start believing it's just who you are. But it's not who you are. It's who you've become after forgetting the original language of your soul. After losing touch with the boy who once felt everything so vividly. It's who you became when the ache of loneliness became too heavy to carry without anesthesia. Lust becomes the anesthesia, and you don't even realize that it's numbing the very pain that was meant to lead you back to wholeness. This isn't identity. This is survival, a shell you've mistaken for a home. You weren't born chasing bodies, you were born craving connection. You were wired for warmth, not friction. For love, not performance. For presence, not perfection. But the world didn't offer you those things when you needed them most. So in the absence of nurturing touch, you clung to visual desire. In the absence of emotional safety, you built fantasy fortresses. Because in fantasy, you never feel abandoned. In fantasy, you're always chosen, always desired. You control the narrative, and in that control, you find a false sense of wholeness. But that illusion costs you more than you realize. Because while you're king in your imagination, you're absent in your reality. And reality left unattended begins to decay. And the cost doesn't stop there. The more you escape, the harder it becomes to stay. You lose the ability to sit in silence, to wrestle with longing, to face uncertainty without immediately reaching for comfort. Real relationships demand your presence, your patience, your vulnerability. But lust teaches you something else. Escape. It teaches you to leave when things get difficult, to scroll instead of sit, to fantasize instead of feel. You stop taking emotional risks. You stop showing up for the messy, awkward parts of love, the parts that actually make it real. And eventually, even your highs become hollow. You chase intensity, but nothing ever lands. You feel desire, but it never turns into depth. So you get stuck in a loop, chasing the next woman, the next moment, the next surge of electricity just strong enough to silence the ache for a few hours. But afterward there's emptiness, a hollow echo where your heart used to speak. And over time you start resenting yourself, not just for the actions, but for the person you've become. You call yourself weak. You say you're broken. You believe you're incapable of real love. But Jung would say it's not that you're broken. It's that you've become estranged from the sacred feminine within you, the nurturing presence of your own soul, the inner mother that holds, soothes, and loves you into wholeness. You've lost that connection, and without it, even your fire begins to burn you from the inside out. You have fire, but no warmth. You have hunger, but no holiness. And lust, when left unintegrated, becomes a quiet violence, not against others, but against yourself. You betray your own promises. You swear you'll stop. You even cry afterward, swearing never again. But when night falls and loneliness whispers, you return. And each return makes the guilt heavier and the healing harder. You don't understand why it keeps happening, and so you begin to confuse your pattern with your nature. But this isn't your nature, this is your wound. Over time, your mind becomes fractured, unable to focus, unable to rest. Your heart becomes hardened, resistant to softness. Your dreams turn into dry sketches of what once burned brightly in you. Nothing satisfies, because nothing real can match the intensity you've trained your body to expect. Real life starts feeling like a letdown. You've wired yourself for high-voltage experiences, but starved yourself of soul depth. The result? You need more stimulation to feel less and less. The high is brief. The collapse is long. The glow fades fast, but the emptiness lingers. And worst of all, you start needing more and feeling less. Jung called this psychic possession. When a complex hijacks your psyche, your will is no longer your own. You're not acting, you're being acted through. And in this case, it's not the real you chasing lust, it's your unmet needs, your buried pain, your unloved inner child searching for intimacy in the only way he knows how. He's not evil, he's exiled. And until you welcome him home, he'll keep driving you into the arms of strangers. So the loop continues. Real relationships become impossible. You sabotage vulnerability. You panic at the first sign of emotional intimacy. You swipe to avoid discomfort. You scroll to drown silence. You chase someone else's body to avoid coming home to your own. But here's the truth, no one tells you until it's almost too late. Lust doesn't just block you from love, it blocks you from becoming you. It doesn't only fracture your relationships with others, it fractures the mirror through which you see yourself. You forget who you were before the ache turned into addiction, before the hunger for connection was replaced by a loop of pursuit and regret. Lust bleeds your creative energy. The same sacred fire meant to write your poetry, build your dreams, hold space for your purpose, gets misused. It doesn't burn upward, it burns out. Your mind feels foggy, your heart feels distant, your spirit feels worn. And you wonder, why am I always so tired? But it's not just fatigue. It's not even addiction in the way most people define it. It's misdirection of soul fire. You've poured sacred energy into temporary escape. You've lit candles for false gods, and now your altar feels empty. Eventually, the numbness arrives. But it's not the peaceful kind that follows closure or acceptance. It's the deadening kind, the soul-suffocating silence where nothing moves, where laughter feels fake, where joy feels out of reach, where everything becomes fine, but nothing feels real. You stop evolving. Not because you've given up, but because you can't even hear the whisper inside that used to say, grow. That whisper has been silenced so many times it now hides behind the noise. And when it finally dares to speak, "This isn't who I came here to be," you can barely recognize its voice. You think you're being punished by guilt or shame. But Jung would say no, the real punishment isn't moral, it's spiritual. It's not hellfire, it's numbness. The slow death of becoming less than what your soul came here to be. But there is a path forward, and it doesn't begin with shame. It doesn't require self-hate or denial. Healing never asks you to crucify your longing. It only asks you to listen to it more honestly. Because underneath every craving is a question your soul is aching to ask. And if you can be brave enough to stay with that ache, to truly sit with it instead of stuffing it with distraction, you'll hear something deeper than lust. You'll hear a truth trying to reach you. What is this desire trying to reveal about me? What am I actually hungry for? Is it touch, or is it tenderness? Is it sex, or is it the sacredness of being seen, being chosen, being known? These are not questions of morality. They are questions of meaning. Jung never asked us to kill the instinct. He knew better. He saw how instincts are not enemies. They are messengers. And lust, when left unconscious, becomes compulsion. But when faced with presence, courage, and compassion, it becomes initiation. You don't need to kill the fire. You need to contain it, shape it. Learn to dance with it without letting it burn your house down. Because that same fire that once consumed you with longing, it can become the fire that rebirths you into wholeness. If you're willing to stay close to it, not run from it, not collapse into it, but transform it. This is not repression. This is alchemy. And in that sacred turning, you begin to realize the craving wasn't wrong. It was just confused. It wasn't sin. It was sacred longing. It wasn't meant to be fed blindly. It was meant to be understood. And now you begin again. Not by fighting yourself, but by finally meeting yourself. So how do you begin? Not by escaping, not by punishing yourself for the ache, and certainly not by pretending it isn't there. You begin simply by staying, not with her, not with the fantasy, not with the noise that numbs you. You stay with you. Stay in your body, in the trembling, in the restlessness, in the heat that rises like a storm inside your chest. Stay through the twitch, the scroll, the impulse to disappear. Stay with the ache without answering it. Stay one breath longer than you usually do. That is where the transformation begins, not in grand gestures, but in quiet resistance, in holy stillness. At first it'll feel unbearable. Your nervous system will scream. Your skin will itch with old habits. Your mind will flood you with reasons to run. But if you remain rooted, if you breathe into that sacred fire without feeding it, you'll notice something extraordinary. A voice, software gentle, almost forgotten. It says, "I miss you," and it's not coming from the world outside. It's not coming from a lover or a screen or a thrill. It's coming from the soul you left behind. The part of you that once believed in magic. The boy who just wanted to be held without needing to earn it. The man who confused performance with worth. The self who was abandoned in the chase for validation. And suddenly you realize, this craving wasn't for pleasure. It was for presence. It wasn't for the body of another. It was for the reunion with your own. Desire isn't the enemy. Forgetting yourself is. And now you're beginning to remember. Not with force, not with fear, but with fierce, unshakable love for the one within you who never stopped waiting. Jung never said to kill your shadow. He said to turn toward it, to sit across from it like an old friend, to ask it questions instead of casting it into exile. Because what we repress doesn't disappear. It festers. It disguises itself as craving, compulsion, disconnection. And healing isn't found in denial. It's found in the sacred act of dialogue. So what does that look like? It means making space for your shadow to speak, not to dominate you, but to reveal you. You don't overcome your darkness by pretending it isn't there. You transform it by welcoming it home. You take its hand and say, "Tell me your story." And then you begin to create, not for attention, not for applause, but because your soul has something to say. You write, not to be read, but to be heard. You pick up the guitar. You open the paint. You move your body in ways that don't perform, but release. You let the grief surface without shutting it down. You let the silence breathe without trying to fill it. You go to the forest, not to escape the world, but to remember the language of stillness. You sit beneath the sky and ask, what do I actually want? Not from others, not from the future, but from this moment, this breath. And most of all, you listen. Not just once, every day, every hour. Because healing isn't a switch you flip. It's a relationship you cultivate, a deepening intimacy with your own soul. And over time, the cravings lose their grip. They become softer, less frantic. Because you're no longer searching for home in someone else's eyes. You've come back to your own. You've remembered what it feels like to belong, first and foremost, to yourself. Not because the desires vanish, but because you no longer fear their voice. You stop running from the heat, and you begin to listen to it. You no longer treat your longing like a problem to solve or a shame to bury, but as a sacred message from within. You welcome the fire, you bow to its presence, you let it speak. And when it finally does, it doesn't scream for lust or chaos. It whispers what it always meant. I want love. I want beauty. I want meaning. I want me. And suddenly you realize you were never broken, just misdirected, just starved for connection in a world that taught you to trade intimacy for performance. You don't need to shame yourself anymore. You don't need to be perfect, impressive, or in control. You just need to come home. Because when you reclaim your anima, the inner feminine, the soul's radiant and receptive energy, you stop chasing it in others. You begin to embody it. You stop searching for the softness outside because you finally feel it within. You cry without guilt. You feel without resistance. You soften without collapsing. You become magnetic, not because you're performing, but because you're finally whole. And then, when someone does come along, it's not to complete you. You don't cling to them. You don't beg them to stay. You don't treat love as a rescue mission because you've already met the parts of you that once waited at the edge of abandonment. You held them in silence. You tended to them in the dark. You loved them where lust could never reach, where only the soul ever could. And if something inside you feels tender right now, if your chest is heavy, if your eyes sting with unshed truth, then you've already begun the journey back. So pause. Sit with this. Let it echo. Let it pierce through the noise and ask you softly, what have I truly been craving all along? Not the girl, not the high, not the chase, but wholeness, peace, belonging. Tell me in the comments. What truth stirred inside you? Like, subscribe, and drop a super thanks if this spoke to your shadow. It helps keep Psychotic alive. But more than that, it keeps you alive in the ways that matter most. And remember, you were never addicted to her. You were addicted to the feeling of being whole. Now, give that back to yourself every day, with every breath, until you no longer need to seek love, because you've become it.